Hello, I'm JB. I want to thank everybody for being here today. Over the next 45 minutes, we're going to explore the 7 things that Mexico can do for your startup, from cost-effective teams to a vibrant, well-established startup ecosystem that nurtures great talent. I'm a startup founder myself. In 2016, after 15 years in the Silicon Valley, I decided to co-found Visor, a fintech startup operating in Mexico and Brazil. And for the past almost 5 years as a CTO of Visor, I've been impressed by the quality, the diversity, and the professionalism of the talent that is available to us in Mexico. Mexico is a great place to set up a development team. Mexico is a great place to find great VCs. Mexico is a great place to try things, build MVPs, learn and grow. It's also a launchpad or a bridge between a 1 billion people market in Latin America and the most sophisticated and largest market in the US and Canada. I don't see how a management team of a startup in the US would not have, at the very least, a desire to consider establishing a team to serve the US from Mexico. With that in mind, please allow me to introduce our great speakers today, who will talk to you in details about the 7 things Mexico can do for your startup. First, Roberto, who's a senior managing partner with a very premier private equity fund based in Mexico. Then Roman, whose VC fund invests in great talent in Latin America, and Veronica, who's my own beloved corporate attorney, and Arturo, who has extensive management consulting experience, and will talk to us about the similarities between management culture in Mexico and the US. So without further ado, I would like to invite Roberto to get us started with a panorama of the VC and PE fund industry in Mexico. Roberto, how is the VC and private equity ecosystem in Mexico supporting technology companies? Technology companies. What is muted?
If you can go to the next slide. So as you can see, was I muted since the beginning?
You were muted, Roberto. You were muted.
Okay, so let me start again. Thank you, JB. Thank you for the invitation. Private equity has come a long way in the last 20 years. When I started Nexus Capital 20 years ago, well, part of the founding group 20 years ago, nobody knew what was private equity and who was Nexus. Today we manage above $1 billion in assets under management in Mexico and Spain. Private equity has come a long way. Today has 60 billion in assets under management, 60 billion in assets under management, and 1.3 million jobs in 4 main asset classes. Today we'll focus on venture capital and private equity growth. If you go to the next page, in the first slide you can see the evolution of the industry and how has it grown since 2005. And even with this tremendous growth, there's still a very low penetration as a percentage of GDP. So there's still a lot of room to grow if you compare it with developed economies. If we go to the next page, here international and local funds participate. They have supported medium-sized companies, in some cases large companies, with very successful stories. But it's not just the money they bring to the table. Private equity managers help develop value creation plans for the company. They bring professional management inside the companies. They improve the corporate governance standards and bring a board of directors and independent directors to the company, and also improve the financing structure in the company, bring additional debt for growth with much better conditions. So this is a general landscape of the industry. If we go to the next slide regarding venture capital, this industry has even grown more than the general industry of private equity or alternative assets. It has increased 42 times since 2003. There's a large talent of pool and an entrepreneurial founder culture not seen before in Mexico. Some critical infrastructure has developed in terms of telecom, broadband, smartphones, and credit card penetration that has, and also a change in consumer behavior by younger generations has also propelled the venture capital and startups here in Mexico. There are a lot of successful stories such as Corner Shop, Kavak. Today, Kavak announced a new investment by SoftBank with a valuation above 1 billion, and the company has raised for 400 billion. So that's a very successful story. Gaia, that it's a retailer that does furniture. So there's a lot of successful stories. Local VC funds are supporting the initial rounds, and then international players are coming in with financing additional rounds. So the ecosystem is working pretty well, and you see it in the market and with a lot of successful stories. And I'll let Roman Leal get into more detail on the venture capital ecosystem.
Roman, you're muted.
Hey, there I am. Well, thank you, Roberto, for that handoff. So, as you said, I think that this is a very special, very timely event given today's the big announcement of Kavak and reaching a big milestone in its journey as a unicorn, but also for Mexico and that ecosystem. And I think it's a very positive milestone because success begets success, and I think that it's going to be great for the branding and the recognition of what's going on in Mexico. But for a lot of VCs, including ourselves at Leap, which have been investing both in the U.S. and in Mexico for the last few years, we're not surprised. I think that we've been seeing the building blocks of what makes a very vibrant VC ecosystem. Definitely for the last several years. And so on this slide, we just have, really, the list doesn't do it justice. These are just a few of the names, very successful startups in Mexico that have gone on to raise and continue to build very successful companies. But it's a virtuous cycle, right? And the VC ecosystem cannot really succeed without critical elements. You definitely need the entrepreneurial spirit, and I think Mexico has shown that it has that. These companies, as they scale their businesses, operations, and gain more capital, need to also scale their talent, and so there needs to be a talent pool there that can allow these companies to continue to grow, and we've shown that, or they've shown that, and you need capital, right? And so on the previous slide, you saw also some of the big VCs that have started to enter the market, and there'll be much more, right? And so I think that last year was a watershed moment when we started to see some of the numbers committed to Latin America, obviously led by SoftBank, but you're going to see a lot more, and we've been speaking to a lot of these VCs that are looking at Mexico, and again, that's why the milestone of today is so important. If you go to the next slide. And so what are the startup entrepreneurs, the talent, and the VC so excited about? And these next few slides would be a little bit biased because they're important themes for Leap. But I think that they're just cases in point that in Mexico, the population size, the gaps that exist in the market, but also some of these demographic trends we're seeing, given that most of a large majority of the population are young, tech savvy, and are going to be consuming more digital services and products relative to other generations. at least for billion-dollar market opportunities, right? And so we're going to highlight just 3 here, but I'm sure that others in this call can highlight others, other sectors. So first is the massive fintech opportunity. And in that fintech opportunity, pick your product, pick your poison, whether it's insurance, whether it's retirement, whether it's obviously credit and banking. Less than half of the population is catered to by traditional financial services, and there are a variety of factors driving that. But instead of kind of looking at those challenges, we're looking at the opportunity, right? Can technology serve these customers better? And it's been proven that yes, they can be served better in banking and insurance and in other financial services across the world, in nations like India, like China, obviously in the United States where we also invest, and Brazil, which is probably another good example to analogy to Mexico. And so we do expect several winners in these products in fintech to evolve in Mexico. On the second slide, on the second theme, is e-commerce, right? And this is something that has been long coming and across the world, but we know that one of the big impacts or the sort of tangential impacts of COVID-19 has been an acceleration of consumption online. And so this is just a chart showing that even if we expect Mexico to grow somewhere north of 400% in terms of e-commerce this year, which is something that we're seeing across the board, but it's going to be more pronounced in emerging markets. It's still going to represent a very small fraction of total retail sales, and so this will be a banner year for Mexico and other emerging economies, but it could be also an inflection point for what's to come. And what we're excited about is that a lot of the population are trying, how do I shop online for my food, for my supermarket, for my electronics, for my banking services for the first time? And it's going to give these consumers an ability to test, is consuming online and digitally better than my alternative? And for a lot of these consumers, we expect the answer is going to be yes. It doesn't mean that they're never going to back to the store, but it means that online can be part of the reality going forward. And in the next slide, we also invest at Leap. We care a lot about SaaS, particularly SaaS for the small and medium-sized business, because we do think that now with the cloud delivery models and do-it-yourself type models, it is attractive and possible to acquire a volume of small and medium-sized businesses at attractive unit economics. And so, if you look at LATAM as a whole and Mexico specifically, there is just a significant runway. Very small number of these small businesses are using the tools to automate their business. And I think that in a post-COVID world, they're probably noticing that that's not the most efficient way to go. And so we think from accounting, payroll, the finance department, HR, how these companies automate their processes is now top of mind and will continue to be top of mind going forward. So this is a huge opportunity for SaaS tools in Mexico as well. If you go to the next slide, so I'll carry forward with the theme of sort of what makes this ecosystem so vibrant. And now, this is beyond VC. Now, obviously for VC, this is important because we know that of the top 3 issues or ways that we can help our startups, talent is always 1, 2, or 3, right? It's always there. As you scale, you're gonna need more talent. As you become sort of more, as you reach mature phases, you're going to need more specific types of talent, and so that's very, very important. What we've seen, and we kind of wear 2 hats because we invest in the U.S. and we invest in LATAM. On the U.S. side, it's been an issue, right? There's a talent shortage here, and in fact, this is just from 2017, the latest data that we can find. There were about 500,000 job openings from big to medium to small kind of tech companies, and it was clear that the U.S. was not producing enough developers to fill that gap, and so. You do have a lot of these, tech schools or development schools that are scaling, but by and large, a lot of the, especially large companies, started to look elsewhere and internationally to bring talent and try to fill those gaps. And we know about the stories around India and China being amazing pools of talent as well, and they have played a big role for a lot of these companies. But what we've seen in the last few years, almost organically, because some of our companies, our portfolio companies that are in the U.S., started to really, hire in Mexico and leverage the talent down there, is that Mexico is an amazing pool of talent as well, with some very distinctive competitive advantages. One is the time zone in the proximity, right? It's much easier to get to and from, but also you're talking about an hour difference of up to 3 hours versus 10 plus. Huge differences there. Next slide. And then, finally, on top of the sort of indirect costs, right, of being able to get to and from, having the ability to maybe perhaps build culture because, you're so close that you can fly the team in or get there, within a day or 2 days travel. There is a direct cost that, it's pretty competitive, right? And so we're not going to say that, Mexico is quote unquote the least cost alternative. That's not the point here. But the point is that for about very competitive cost you can get at other markets, but with a much better time zone and proximity factor. I think that Mexico should continue to be a thriving ecosystem for tech startups, both in the U.S. and in Latin America.
Veronica, if you could, keep us rolling. I think you're going to have to unmute yourself.
Okay. Hello, good afternoon. Thank you, Jean Bernard, for the opportunity of being here at this webinar. It is an honor for me to share with such important people. My topic is favorable labor laws in Mexico. Can I see the first slide, please? Learn to look after your staff first, and the rest will follow. Richard Branson. Some of the benefits that we see that our labor laws offer are: we have highly regulated laws, we have competitive wages, we have new legal procedures and regulation for labor unions and for collective bargaining agreements, we have skilled labor force and strong intellectual property protection. So we'll start with the next slide. Why is it that we see that to have a highly regulated laws is a benefit? Well, when rules are stable and when rules are clear, there won't be any surprises. Mexican law is based in the civil law tradition. This means that our main sources of law are codified texts that derive from provisions of our federal constitution. Article 123 of our federal constitution and the federal labor law, they protect basic minimum rights of workers, such as job stability, vacations, overtime payment, maximum work shifts, social security rights, maternity rights, freedom of association, collective bargaining agreements as well. We have a social security law. This law covers duties and rights of both employee and employers in healthcare benefits and in retirement funds. We have a National Workers Housing Fund Institute law, best known as Infonavit. This law was created to provide support for workers so they could buy their own homes. And then we have also a Retirement Systems Fund law. Can we see the next? Okay, thank you. One of the main reasons why foreign companies have relocated their manufacturing services to Mexico are low competitive costs in wages. Already Roman told us about this, but we have to think that besides paying a salary, we have to pay contributions and taxes, as in many other countries. So as long as you have an idea, as an employer, you will pay a 5% of the employee's earning wages to contribute to the National Workers Housing Fund payment. Social Security. Social Security is based in 3 types of contributions. Contributions from workers, contributions from the employers, and contributions from the government. So it will depend, the contribution, in salary levels and on the determination of risk of your company. But think about a 33 to a 37% of earning wages. There's also a local tax, a payroll tax of a 3% over total payroll. And different from the United States, we have this obligation as employer to share company profits. That's at 10%, but don't worry, this will be only until the second year if you are a new company. And if you create a new product, it will be until the third year. Also think about paying bonuses. There's a Christmas bonus, minimum 15 days salary, vacation premium, 25% of our days of vacations, and there's a Sunday premium if your workers work on Sunday of 25%. Let's go to the other slide, please. Another big benefit, and this is regarding part of the renegotiations of the United States, Mexico, and Canada agreement. Before, in this sector of union labor and collective bargaining agreements in Mexico, there were a lot of frauds and a lot of abuses. So this is why the international commitment from Mexico was to amend the law in this sector. So these amendments made last year to our federal labor law are looking to bring transparency to this sector. We have secret election for union leaders. We have a creation of a decentralized agency of the Federal Public Administration. This agency will be in charge of registering collective bargaining agreements and union organizations. And collective bargaining agreements will now be public, will be distributed to all workers. Before, workers didn't even know the content of these agreements. And workers will have complete freedom of association. Workers can decide whether they want to be part of a union or not. The next slide, please. Thank you. Another big benefit is that Mexico has this strong international commitment to protect intellectual property. What does the federal labor law tells us about intellectual property? Well, Article 163 says that inventor will have the right to have his name as author of the invention. If the employee works in investigation activities and procedural improvements, the intellectual property will belong to the employer, and the employee will have the right to be paid an additional compensation. If you're talking about software, software is governed by the federal law of copyrights. And it's almost the same thing. It says that if the employees assigned activities are as a developer, then copyright to any written software will belong to the employer. This is relevant, so in your labor agreements, the activities for which you are hiring your workers must be clear as long to protect this ownership. And the next slide. And the big benefit that also Roman told us about, we have a big labor force of young people waiting to work for you. 30.7 million people in Mexico are young people from 15 to 29 years old. This means that 56.5% of these 30.7 million are economically active population. And talking about young people, let's talk about new job tendencies. Nowadays, people prefer temporary positions. Companies hire independent workers for short periods of time. Why would this be relevant? Well, because this is opposite to the nature of the labor relationships that are protected by federal labor law. So also we have to be aware that in our labor agreements, we state clearly that we are hiring these people for these short periods of time to avoid violating workers' rights. And also home office. Home office nowadays, almost all companies have used this modality before COVID, and nowadays almost all companies. So in this sector, regulation is still pending. In the federal labor law, we talk about home office, but only like job at distance, but it doesn't really represent the reality of home office. Thank you so much for listening. Coming together is a beginning, keeping together is progress, and working together is success. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica. Arturo, would you talk to us about management style in Mexico and why Mexico is one of the closest countries to the US.
Yes, of course. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. One of the things that I always tell people is when I was in my former life a consultant, a banker, and introduce people or foreign businesses to Mexico, such as you may be, that people had a common reaction to Mexico and to our ecosystem, a positive surprise. You already have heard a little bit about that with Roberto and all the other speakers telling us a little bit about what the private equity is, how the venture capital is, how the workforce is. But there is a lot of things that this ecosystem brings to us. I find it that now they get very surprised when they learn about the topics that you just heard about. Nearshoring, which Roberto will address in depth in the next section, that is reinforced today by the Trump administration, where it's exploring all the financial incentives to bring companies back from Asia and other parts of the world to the United States, but also to Latin America and the Caribbean. And then, of course, Mexico is part of that ecosystem that now we have with the USMCA. The second thing that Veronica talked about is the abundant Mexican talent. But I want to just emphasize that it's not only talent, it's also technological talent. We have over 200 plus universities and institutions that year by year turn out thousands of undergrads in sciences. And these undergrads are really focused on not only the studies, but also getting the badges, all the badges from the big companies, the ones that make them the technological experts. And stream learning today is very popular around techies in Mexico. Then I come up to the topic of the USMCA, which of course was just recently ratified, the new NAFTA, because they just changed the name. It's more or less the same with a little changes, but the changes are also helping the Mexico, Canada, and the United States to bring in more companies into their own borders. And because they require more locally sourced inputs for having this tariff-free exports into the three companies. But that is not all. Mexico has developed things that are different. We have established industrial clusters which are very efficient in electronics, in medical equipment, in the automotive industry, in software, and there are decades of experience in specialized knowledge in networks that also help themselves in these ecosystems, in these clusters around Mexico and in several parts of our country. The fifth subject that I would like to talk about is Mexico's diversity. It's not only its culture, which many of you may be aware of and perhaps enjoy, but it's also its business development, which is key. In spite of the pandemic, there are several regions in Mexico that continue expanding and receiving foreign investment, such as the Bajío region, the U.S.-Mexico border, the Guadalajara, Greater Guadalajara, Greater Monterrey, and of course, Mexico City. And these regions have also developed into clusters which are very efficient. To wrap up this slide, I would just like to remind you that Mexico is a country of innovation in simple and in very complex fields. Our scientists gave birth to the color TV, to the birth pill, to many other things. And today, for example, they are frontrunners in data transmission through LED lights, which has a lot of benefits. You cannot steal the signal away, and it also can become much faster and less clogged. And we all know that innovation is king, and there is always innovation in Mexico, and a surprise that you will find with the companies that you deal with, not only with your team. If we go to the next slide, you can talk about what is the cultural proximity and U.S. management style that we have in Mexico. It's interesting to learn that most people are surprised with this affinity. In Mexico, you will find it is much more familiar with the U.S. than most countries. And you can note with the statistics that you find there of people being bicultural, and they speak English, and they learn in English, especially the tech people. But Mexico has a long history of being joined with the United States. It was the first country to receive IBM, Coca-Cola, and many other foreign countries outside of the US, and has a long history of openness in incorporating foreigners into the society and the ecosystem. We're not a closed system that doesn't accept foreigners here. On the contrary, I would say we are very open and very friendly with foreign people and try to help them out in achieving their goals. Myself, I am an example of multinational penetration in the Mexican business arena because I work for basically for multinationals, the likes of McKinsey, Pricewaterhouse, and Citibank in the past before founding my companies. We have a talent profiling company and an M&A strategy development firm that have been open for over 20 years. The other thing that links Mexicans to the U.S. society is the cultural and the sports arena. And you may say, well, sports are not that important, but you talk about sports when you're a businessman and when you're out of taking a beer, having a beer, or doing something. So it is very interesting to know that our soccer leagues are now exchanging players. We follow baseball, we follow basketball, we follow the NFL. Perhaps it's the most watched sports in Mexico. So there are a lot of things, cultural activities that Mexicans share with the U.S. And not only with that, but also there is an inflow and outflow of students coming into Mexico to study medicine. A lot of Americans do that, and many Mexicans going to study, especially technology and business in the United States. And this is where we find the mixed culture of the Mexican innovation inside multinationals that also has improved the local teams because they address problems and issues in the U.S. style and of management and creativity, but with the Mexican attitude of finding out, of doing things different. This broad bicultural base knowledge of English, especially in the technology field, help integration and innovation deeply in our country. And now, just to finish up, aside of the review of the Mexican cultural business aspects, we have to remember that because of these things, because of these issues that we have been talking about, right now, today, very important nation companies such as the Taiwan-based electronic manufacturer Foxconn, Pegatron, are eyeing Mexico to establish new factories. Of course, due in fact for many reasons, because of the US-China trade war and the coronavirus pandemic that, of course, has prompted everybody to re-examine their global supply chains. And that is why they are finding Mexico an adequate place to reestablish or to put another part of their chain into the market. And of course, this is also supported by the brandishing of the new free trade agreement within the world's biggest consumer market. And Mexico, with its geography, with its low wages, with its time zones in its favor, it has reestablished itself as a favorable destination. Now, despite of all the global recession and concerns about business climate under the current president, it is no surprise, for me at least, that the foreign investment data shows holding up so far this year. To wrap up, I would just like to give you just 3 simple recommendations for any businessman or entrepreneur that is thinking about Mexico. First of all, you must articulate your strategy, but you have to think about cultural diversity. In spite of the fact that Mexico is very close to the United States, there are some differences, and you have to look a little bit differently into that. Choose your team wisely. There are very many tools of artificial intelligence that profile your personnel, and that reduces misfits and improves the profiling of people that really can work from a home office location, and that can reduce the risk of your establishing of your company in Mexico. And finally, establish technological links and cooperation with other technological hubs in North America, such as Silicon Valley, such as Montreal, to enhance your execution. With this, I finish and I pass the toll to my friend Roberto, who will probably give you a better view of all the things we talked about in terms of nearshoring.
Thank you, Arturo. And I just unmuted so it doesn't happen like the last time. But thank you very much. Just to finalize, there's a huge opportunity to launch your business in South America. in the next 10 years, there will be more than 1 billion people in the region, and according to some estimates, 75% will be connected to the internet. There's a big change in consumer behavior. People are willing to try new things and try new services. The pandemic has accelerated this, and now people that did not buy online are buying online. They're doing their supermarket needs online. They're doing their banking needs online, and the fintech industry, e-commerce, and software as a service are going to be the most beneficial of concepts. Are going to be the ones who benefit on this changing trend. And to conclude, Mexico is one of the key launch pads in the region. It has the basic infrastructure we mentioned, broadband and telecom and smartphone penetration, increasing credit card penetration to attend the demand that the region will have. I mentioned there's a common language, excluding Brazil, that you can roll out in several countries at a time. So Mexico has a huge opportunity. There's this growing VC industry that is supporting entrepreneurs. There's a talent and everything set up, even with the pandemic and the current economic conditions. There should be a huge opportunity to attend Latin America and to attend Mexico with these changing trends. So thank you very much, and I want to pass the word to the word to JB to do the Q&A.
Well, thank you all for that. Several questions came to us. I would like to direct one first question to Roman. If you are the CEO or the CTO of a startup, a US startup today, with the idea of doing team augmentation in Mexico, or tapping into the engineering talent in Mexico, what city would you choose? I mean, Guadalajara has been a traditional technology hub. There are other areas. For example, IBM has invested very heavily in Querétaro. With your experience of investing and also advising companies in the US to set up production and operations in Mexico, would you advise them to choose one particular city, and which city would that be?
Yeah. This is where it can get personal for some people, no? But the truth is that there's a lot of pockets of very interesting pockets of talent. Organically, a lot of our companies started to hire in Guadalajara, and so initially in the early life span of Leap, we would advise to look at Guadalajara because we had established channels there, and then we started to realize that places like Querétaro, places like obviously Mexico City have tons of talent as well. And so my advice would be this: it's you want to set up sort of a beachhead, and if it's assuming it's not one-off, assuming you're going to actually create a team that to analyze what is the purpose of that team. Now, if it's solely just tech development, sort of engineering and product, honestly, you can't go wrong with either or. Guadalajara has definitely an established ecosystem, but so does Mexico City. If it's going to be perhaps tech plus operations, meaning you want help on the sales, either sales leads or actually closing sales, then Mexico City is very attractive because especially if it's enterprise sales, because you have all the large enterprises there, right? And so I would ask to kind of weigh different factors of what the vision of the team ultimately is, but you cannot. I mean, it's really 2 or 3 markets that I think offer very similar advantages.
Anybody wants to build on that?
Let me just add that there are several cities that can be that are the right place. You have to look at how many technological schools are in the region, and if there's a big labor force with technology education in that. In one of the companies of our fund, we have a talent center in Merida, and some people would never imagine that Merida could be a tech hub. So that's just an example of several regions where there could be the talent to do this.
Okay. Another question that came up, and I think that would be for Arturo. I was speaking to a friend of mine who has a startup in San Francisco, and he's trying to develop an app, a consumer app, and he was considering using Mexico as a experimentation ground, basically, to do an MVP and determine whether the app had legs, whether the idea was actually sound and would be interesting to customers. And he said, well, why wouldn't I do that in Mexico? Because the cost of doing advertising are also lower, and allow me to gain feedback on the idea without the high cost of doing it in San Francisco, for example. Do you see Mexico as a possible MVP ground, or an experimental ground for US startups in order to be able to gain insight into a business idea?
I think it's a wonderful idea. It's not only a good idea, it's a wonderful idea because you have a great market. I think someone has to unmute their mic. There's a little reverb right now. It is a great market. JB, perhaps you mute your mic. Mexico is a great market to test many things because, of course, if you have a service that has some similarities with the United States, you would find it here in Mexico, and it would be easy to prove if it's an appropriate field to do it. If you need to further develop it, there are a lot of very able techies who can help you further develop your app and customize it in order to fine-tune the needs that the market may need when you're doing your first launch of your MVP. So it is a great idea. I think that not too many people have done it, but it would be, of course, cost efficient and business efficient.
I think you are put on mute. Okay. Another question, maybe a question for Veronica. And it's a terrible question, but could you tell us a little bit about the, if God forbid something goes wrong, what is the process to let go people in Mexico? It's always a difficult thing to do, but in some countries, I know France, for example, is a terrible country because it's very it's cumbersome and it's also expensive. How does it take place in Mexico when you have to do right sizing, or when you have to let people go?
Okay. In case of unfair dismissal of a worker, the process will be you have to give an advice and notice to the worker, and if he doesn't want to sign, then you will have to go to the, nowadays it's still working, the board labors, but the justice will change because of some amendments made for the federal labor law. Now there will be these centers of alternative justice. Well, the issue is that you will go with your worker and try to have an agreement, and this will be until 45 days for this alternative justice. And if you don't have an agreement with your worker, then you will go to the big process. And what do you have to pay? Well, 3 months of salary and some 20 days per year that you have worked, and proportional things like vacation bonuses and Christmas bonuses. That will be like most that you have to pay. But we are looking forward to this alternative justice, so it will only be 45 days and process don't get so long.
Question about the COVID situation. That might be a question for Arturo as well, who's very heavily advising companies on operations. What is the current COVID situation? Is Mexico closed on the business side? I mean, do employees have to be remote? Can they go to the office? What is the way Mexico reacts when facing a situation like that?
Thank you, JB. Mexico is still on a orange and yellow light. It's not totally open. We have not opened completely. Some of basic industries do have been acting open from the onset. The ones that are considered the survival industries. What I have found within my clients is that a lot of people are now trying to understand if they can operate on a home office basis. We have developed a tool within our system in order to tell them if these people are capable of doing home office and what type of supervision they need. And we have found, interestingly, that over 80% of the workforce of the people of our clients are very capable of working from their home office. And the level of supervision, which is very important, is not as high as you would expect. What most of the companies are doing is setting Monday tasks and Friday supervision, unless there is a very specific deadline that they have to meet. But and with this, they have found their productivity increasing, which has been amazing. The people would have thought that that when you're not working at the office that you're less productive, but no, of course you are not wasting time in going to the office and back. And in Mexico City, especially also in Monterrey and Guadalajara, traffic is very heavy. Querétaro, traffic has become a burden. We'll have to move to Merida, which is much better climate and no traffic. But in terms of traffic, it is a huge advantage not to have to move to your office and be able to start at 9 and have meetings. I know you have 2 to 3 Zoom meetings a day. The meetings are more efficient and they are better prepared and they get to the point faster. And we have done this with our clients, and by identifying who are the people who really can do this, you are doing groups. And there are other people who have very low profile for home working, and these people, we are doing a different attitude. We're doing, if they can, they will come to the office. But if it's feasible, what we're doing is having a much tighter supervision in order to see if they are working. And unfortunately, we have had to recommend some people to be laid off because of this lack of attitude.
Awesome. Roman, I know you have some relation to companies that are promoting team augmentation or offshoring or nearshoring to Mexico. Can you comment a little bit on your views on how practical this is for U.S. companies to be able to gain support and what are the challenges that could be faced by U.S. companies in setting up operations in Guadalajara or in Mexico City, and maybe some success stories of things that worked well?
Yeah, so look, I'll give you the high level numbers from the portfolio. Of the in Fund 1, 11 companies were US based, and of those 11 companies, 9 of them are now actively hiring in Mexico. Some of them have gone even further down and are now hiring in places like Colombia, for example. But by and large, it has been mostly in Mexico. Some of them have now established their an actual office there, and so they're taking a further step in terms of really setting up maybe their second, for example, headquarters or regional headquarters there. And of those, I would highlight two companies, that are probably, one of them is probably very well known in Mexico for really being, one of the promoters of this is Wiseline, right? So Wiseline now has about 500 or so engineers in Mexico. The majority of those in Guadalajara, Jalisco, but a lot of them also in another office in Mexico City. And the second one is Paystand, which is a U.S. based, Santa Cruz, based company that is now, they've made it official that basically they want half their company to be, 50% of the company to be down in Mexico. But the way that these two have done it is very different. These two are startups, right? Which, the cap table is very important as a way to incent employees. And so these engineers that are Mexico based are part of the team, and through and through, they're not just receiving a salary, they have an equity stake in these companies. And so the vision, the hope is that when the US company has an exit, it would also impact the wealth generation in Mexico. And so beautiful to be part of that story. And that's what we encourage. So we encourage our companies to think about, hey, if you're scaling your team, these are team members that will be down there. And it wasn't really a lot of, it wasn't tough to do. I mean, I think they probably hire their first 2 or 3 engineers and then, or team members, and then they realize there's something here, and all of a sudden they have 10, 12, 15, and in the case of Wiseline, 500. So that's the way that we endorse it. Now, there are also companies that can look at this as, maybe larger publicly traded companies that look for it in terms of volumes of talent. And so that model, the equity model may not work there. We understand that. But that's the way that we, at least through the lens of a VC, and Leap, have encouraged our companies to think about it. And JB, I actually don't know if I responded. Your second part of the question was important, which was the challenges, because it hasn't been all rosy. So I would say definitely, and Veronica was pointing, addressing a lot of these. Understand the labor laws for sure. Understand payroll and how that works. It's very complex. It's very different. It's so complex that one of our investments in Mexico is actually a payroll company, because we wanted to learn it so well that we actually invested in one. And so just understand them, right, and make sure that you partner with someone that can help you set up that payroll mechanism as well. I think you're on mute, JB.
JB, you're muted.
We've had some mute problems today. Roberto, do you want to add anything to that response on US companies, startups, or larger companies setting up operations in Mexico?
Yes, I mentioned an IT services company we invested that has a talent center in Merida. We have a bunch of US clients, and what we do is do all the work in Mexico and the delivery in the US. Before the pandemic, it was harder because some companies, or most companies, wanted to have the work done inside their premises. Due to the pandemic, that had to change. People adapt, and you have to change. And now they're willing for the work be done remotely. So having said that, that has opened the doors for more work to be done in Mexico, and it's a great business because you produce with Mexican costs and sell at US prices, probably a little discount, but it's still a better margin, and it's working pretty good on this side, on that edge. And it's near shoring. People speak English. You're similar time slots, so has been working pretty good.
Great. I have one last technical question. Maybe Roman, you can take it, or Veronica, somebody, I'm getting a feedback loop here. So whoever is on mic, go on mute, please. It's on the tax treatment of stock options. In the US, I mean, because stock options that are being granted have to have a strike price that is the fair value of the stock, that kind of minimizes the appeal of a stock option to a newly joining employee. That basically means that at the second you get the stock option, the value has to be zero because it is priced at the current fair value of the stock, right? I don't believe it is the case in Mexico. Roman, do you have any knowledge of that, or Veronica? And what are the rules regarding tax events related to below fair price strike prices of stock options?
Hey, like I'm gonna be careful here because I don't want this to be construed as I'm giving tax advice, which is important. But there are differences in how that is treated from a Mexico tax perspective and a U.S. tax perspective. So, one high level thing that we do is most of our companies are U.S. based, Delaware based, but there are some that have taken, and this is, I think, a trend that you're going to see a lot more. Have established, for example, a whole company in offshore, like Cayman or something along those lines, because it has implications for a lot of things. Okay, so it has the implications for stock options, but it has implications for exits as well. And so, this is, I guess, more if you are a LATAM-based startup that wants to set up operations in Mexico, thinking through, who acquires me at some point when there's an exit, right? Which is, could be the ultimate vision for many startups. Is it a US-based acquirer? Is it a European-based acquirer? All that has implications on how you structure that as well. So not just sort of the stock options. It's a case-by-case thing. I'm not going to say there's a good way or bad way of doing it, but it is something that it's very, very important to try to get right from the beginning. If you do know that international is in your roadmap, meaning international expansion into different markets, but also international hiring. And if you're going to hire them through stock options, all that's very, very important. But I think it's not a one size fits all.
Veronica, you want to add anything to this?
No, well, I just wanted to ask also, well, not to give tax advice, but I think stock options in Mexico are not good because of tax benefit. They are good because of people. You give stock option to a worker, and it is such relevant because it makes him part of the company. So it is more like an emotional thing, no? Not a tax benefit as this, because as Roman says, well, you will have this tax benefit, but only if you make these strategies to have a holding company, and then the holding company will tribute to other country, but not to Mexico. That's only what I wanted to say.
Awesome. Well, unless there's a last minute comment from anybody, I propose to close the webinar. Thank you so much for everybody for attending. Thank you so much to everybody for attending. The presentation will be available to you, and if you want to request it, can you send me an email? And the video is going to be on YouTube, available right after the event. So thank you, everyone. I think we can close the call now, and have a good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.